Oh, okay.
All right, everybody, we're going to get started in about 5 minutes. 5 minutes. I didn't even have to say anything. Um, I love it when a hush falls over a crowd. Thank you all so much for coming to the 2024 MFA Thesis celebration. Um, can we have an initial round of applause for our graduating MFAers, please? Yeah, I almost want to call for a second one. That really, yeah, can we? Okay, yeah. Um, I mean, what a cohort. Truly. So it's a privilege to be standing in front of you all today, celebrating these brilliant seven, the Magnificent Seven. Um, and we're going to have four readers, then we're going to have an intermission for about 10 minutes or so, so folks can re-up on beverages and pizza, which is over there if you haven't already uncovered it. And then we will have three more readers, and then we'll bow out and turn ourselves over to the great wide open. I should have brought my reading glasses. So dim. Our first reader is Sophie Riley. Yeah, totally appropriate. Oh, all right. It's too easy to call Sophie Riley's brilliant and essential novel Emergence an elegy for the earth as we know it, though there are many elegiac passages. It's too easy to call it an indictment of extractive capitalism and the rapaciousness of manifest destiny and corporate greed. Yeah, it's that. And more than that. The book manages to be both a love letter to the earth and a plea to humanity, desperate, earnest, empathetic, and urgent, for a more generous way of living upon it. It manages to feel timely and timeless. I'm sorry that I can't I need the light from the window. And so okay, yeah. So I wish I could but my eyes are old. Um, yeah. Oh, hi, Jen. Thank you. Oh, I think I could do this now. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's what words look like. The book manages to feel timely and timeless while also being one hell of a wild ride, modeling such generosity with a nuanced and clear-eyed hopefulness and a willingness to entertain even as it inspires our activism. Who gets to tell the human story and its relationship to the earth, its flora, its fauna, its siphonophoric cephalopods? Yeah, you. Sophie's book becomes a meditation on this question and on the act of storytelling itself and choices made by us humans, perhaps in collaboration with or under the guidance of the non-human entities of our world as we spin our tales. In an act of such formal, whimsical daring, she alternates between such carefully drawn and intricately built time frames, a turbulent then and a scorched but potentially healable now. As her book progresses, these timelines and the characters therein become so unexpectedly contingent on one another that the then and now that the book once so carefully delineated begin to slowly evaporate and braid and seem to occur simultaneously amid echoes. And amid such echoes, you all, Sophie's book somehow and miraculously remains grounded in the careful and clear ornaments of exhilarating world building, while also having one foot in every time and another in no time, everywhere and nowhere. The effect is beguiling. A profound commentary on the interconnectivity of human action upon the earth across time, region, and culture, and the fallout therefrom. Sophie's book recognizes, like never before, that our stories, like our actions, like our cephalopod sages, maybe, have legs. Sophie Riley.
All right. I'm just gonna read. This is how we found out Christopher was an artist. By the time summer began to rear itself up, spring sunlight giving way to a rainy, dim sky that only changed during the few hours of night, we had more scrap than we knew what to do with. This made my mother uneasy. She became convinced that people had seen us haul back barrowfuls of metal, that they'd seen Christopher too, and that if they hadn't, it was only a matter of time before they did. Not that her worry was unfounded. We hadn't seen anyone from the town, but off in the foothills we'd seen smoke from peat fires. Sometimes, when we looked through my mother's binoculars, we could see even the tiny silhouettes of people from the mountains traveling across hill crests. Christopher didn't take well to being forced inside. He'd grown comfortable with his free range, sometimes wandering far enough from the house that he seemed no more than a speck in the distance. Now he became moody, swinging from the ceiling or clinging to the dark upper corners of the walls. He camouflaged himself up there, blending in with the dust and the cobwebs so intently that we sometimes couldn't find him for hours. There were a few days that we couldn't find him at all until he showed up in the evening in my loft, sleeping on the mattress we'd made for him out of cloth stuffed with dried peat. His hiding, in turn, made my mother even more anxious. Christopher's presence, unseen, made her feel watched. Sometimes during those weeks, she would take me out to the smelter while Christopher sulked inside. She didn't talk much, just had me sit and work on my knitting or my reading as the wind whistled across the moor as she shoveled coal into the fire and worked the bellows. She had decided to make ingots for the craftsmen in town. It was the fastest way to turn all the metal Christopher had helped us to collect, she said. I often watched her from the corner of my eye, sweat streaming down her face with every shovelful of coal, with every pour of the hot metal into the mold. "How's our mutual friend feeling?" she asked one day as we sat under the sheet metal canopy of the smelter, sheltered from the rain. She was working the bellows, trying to get the coal fire up to a heat that could melt scrap. She'd started doing this since the incident with Micah, refusing to refer to Christopher by his name, instead calling him things like our house guest, our acquaintance. I didn't understand it. She was happy enough to have Christopher help us gather metal, and now could barely even look at him. I don't know. How am I supposed to know? I put down my book and sighed, annoyed at her reticence. I was reading the Epic of Gilgamesh for what must have been the seventh time. It was one of my favorites from her shelf. The flood, the battles, the hugeness of the names and the places. It was like I could fall into them, those grand events, find myself under different skies on continents I would never see. But today I couldn't pay attention. I kept thinking of Micah, of the possibility of living elsewhere, some smelly city or another. I'd never been to a city, but I imagined dirt and shit and noise. The idea set me on edge. This life was good, wasn't it? Not extravagant, maybe not even comfortable, but good. She grunted, her arms pushing down at the accordion bellows. "You saw him this morning, right? How was his color?" "Normal," I lied. He'd been dark gray and somber, only writing "yes, Stu, yes" on his tablet, on his stone tablet, when I'd asked him if he'd wanted breakfast. She stopped pumping, leaning over the instrument and panting. After a spell, she flipped her hair back and stood up straight. "Some of our metal stores have gone missing." She wasn't looking at me, but down at the pile of scrap she'd brought out with us. "I haven't pulled anything from them, and you haven't pulled anything from them because why would you? You think Christopher's stealing from us." I thumped the book down next to me on the lip of the wall by the smelter. My face flushed, though I was careful not to show it. "I didn't say that. You thought it, though. I'm just..." She trailed off, placing her thumb and forefinger at the bridge of her nose. "I think I'm realizing how little we know about him, whether there are others like him, what he wants. We don't even know where he comes from." I do, I said. I actually talked to him. You could ask him some questions sometime. That might help. So where does he come from? The ocean. Then, when I realized how ridiculous that sounded, I added, a habitation in the ocean. That's what crashed, and all the others like him went back into the water. Okay. She straightened again, then began pumping the bellows, though her pulses were half-hearted at best. So he comes from a habitation in the ocean. Great. That doesn't change the fact that he eats like a horse, and that you think he's taking metal. She sighed deeply into the stroke of the bellows, and that I think he's taking our metal, she conceded. Then let's ask him. I stood and, pulsing with petulant determination, strode off toward the house. I didn't even turn around when my mother started following me. Anna, she said, hold on, the fire's going cold back there. Anna. But my mother's calls were no use. I was fueled by pre-teenaged indignation, the recklessness of a child who has just begun to learn what levers to pull. I just want to ask him myself, I said, then bursting into the door. Christopher, come on out. I saw the multi-pronged shape of him drop soundlessly to the corner of the room. Shadowed like this, lit only by the rain-streaked windows, he looked like a writhing mass, a featureless blob fast approaching. I had to fight not to run from him, at least until he came into full view, and I could see his wide eyes, his starburst pupils, his lopsided face. My mother had paused behind me, seeing the same thing I was. I felt her hand on my shoulder, placed there by the instinct to protect me. She slackened when I did, but she kept her hand there. Christopher, I said, swallowing an innate revulsion, remembering that he was a friend, that he would never hurt me. We've noticed some metals gone missing, and well, I turned back to look at my mother, who also looked as though she was fighting to calm herself. We wondered if you knew anything about that. I don't know how I expected him to look. Embarrassed, maybe, or surprised that we were confronting him. What would denial even look like on such a stretched face? But instead, his eyes widened with delight, his tentacles bobbing around him. He took out the tablet. Come, come, he wrote, keeping it steady in front of us. This one shows, this one shows. Then he bounded across the room, pulling himself up to the ledge of my loft. My mother went first, bowing her head a little as she stood, ducking beneath a joist in the ceiling. By the time I got up to where they were, Christopher was ripping into his mattress, strewing peat around the floor like guts, as my mother watched with a horrified fascination on her face. Christopher found what he was looking for. When he did, he stopped ripping into the mattress. He purred with excitement, then turned to face us, 4 or 5 of his tentacles held out in front of him. In them, he cradled a number of small bits of metal twisted together into intricate shapes. Among them were a 9-pointed star, a cloud, a mountain. As he shifted them in his suckers, I started to recognize more of them. There were various objects from around the house, a table, a lathe, a workshop, and in the middle of it all, turning around and around, something the size of a statuette that looked like a person. My mother reached out and took it, gasping. But she could say no more. This one makes things, Christopher wrote, holding the tablet above the display so that it was blocking his face, so that all I could see again was his massive limbs. Such pretty things, pretty make at night, this one when others sleep, shiny pretty. I took the bit of metal from her hand and turned it over. She let me, then stared dumbfounded at Christopher. It's me, I breathed. I hadn't really seen myself in the mirror in a while, especially not my whole body like this. I wondered if the proportions were accurate. I seemed too tall, my legs too long. The sculpture was just big enough for me to fit my whole hand around the waist, and it was rough, all angles and valleys. I had to squint to see some of the finer details in this light, but they were there. The hair was flung over one shoulder like mine, and if I touched it, I could feel the wave of it. How closely had he studied me? How often were his eyes trained on my form to make sure he got this just right? Why? My mother had found her voice again. There was so much of her in that word. I thought I saw a tear in the corner of her eye, but I wasn't sure whether it was from shock or horror or awe. But all Christopher would write was pretty things, such pretty things, as he handed us more of them, as if begging us to examine all the works of his limbs. Eventually, I went downstairs, but my mother stayed up there with him, staring into the sculpture, and watched her with his swiveling eyes, turning them over and over in her hands. Thank you.
Good afternoon. So John Billman, who's the director of Louisa's thesis project, regrets that he can't be here today to introduce her thesis and to celebrate this incredible accomplishment. But as one of her readers, I am really thrilled and honored to be able to fill in this spot. So I'm going to read the introduction that John wrote. So if there's any first person, I don't know if there's any first person in this one, but that if there is, it's John. I regret that I am not good at imitations. Otherwise, I would try to imitate John. So just try to imagine the Stormy Cromer and the vest and all of it, right? So this introduction is written in the style of a book jacket blurb. Praise for Domesticated Animal and Louisa Barron. For Louisa Barron and her characters, the hard way is the only path. Barron reminds us that robots and artificial intelligence will not defeat real writers. Writing entire novels longhand with pen on paper is how it's done. Ride your bike into the headwind. A stout kettlebell is more valuable than a fast computer. The funicular on Granite Island is just for fun. It's quicker to bust your bag straight up the fall line. Grind your own coffee after you've roasted it. Visit New Zealand on a whim with your one-way ticket. Stand-up comics, along with fiction writers, are the last of the truth tellers. The vegan menu is not a consolation document. Jameson's counts as medicine. Baseball, despite the pitch clock, is the greatest game. And animals have souls as well as hearts. Like Virginia Woolf's titular Flush and Mr. Bones in Paul Auster's Timbuktu, Louisa Barron's Blue is a new classic canine protagonist. Through Blue's eyes in Barron's novel, we are reminded that family is foremost, and dogs are family. Domesticated Animal is its auspicious debut. Please welcome Louisa Barron.
I'm slightly too short. It's okay. Okay, there we go. Hi, guys. Thanks. I'm gonna read an excerpt from chapter 3 of the novel. The storm roars through that night. Blue and I have our nest extra padded with smelly blue horse jackets, but it's so warm and cozy, neither of us stirs at first light. The father must have come in and out like a field mouse because the horses were already taken care of by the time we finally got up. His truck hums as it backs down the driveway. The whole family is leaving for church. Usually the mother makes me go too, but I guess she let it go this morning. When I swing open the barn doors to let Blue loose, she gallops their property, circles back and charges me. I giggle and we fall down on the dewy grass. The storm cleaned up the sky and the ground. Everything looks like the after picture of a ShamWow commercial. Shiny, colorful, new. The family lives a ways from the city, but town is only about a 20-minute drive or an hour-long walk. I don't really want to see people, but I do really want ice cream. I run into the house with Blue, quickly wiping her muddy paw prints with an old rag, but the table's already been cleared of breakfast. When I open the freezer, there's nothing but old cuts of meat and a few spare bags of veggies. They're probably going to the grocery store after church. I eat a dry piece of toast, there's no butter, and toss Blue the crusts. She catches every piece in her mouth perfectly. I hold a hand up to her to stay and run upstairs to put on my overalls and best walking shoes. I don't like putting Blue on a leash, but the roads we have to cross scare me, so I clip her old battered rope leash onto her collar, and she doesn't mind. Her tail wags like a pendulum. We head out into the bright day. The elementary school park is almost empty. I know there's a drugstore and an H-E-B a few blocks from here because we've driven past on the way back from church so many times. But the swings look fun, and Blue is panting more than she should be. We trek through the dried grass and sit on the edge of the wood chips. I had thrown a water bottle in my backpack, not really thinking I'd need it. But Blue plops down at my feet, and I crack open the seal and pour some lukewarm water into my cup palms for her. She laps it up, grinning at me with her back teeth. I hop on the swings as she rests. I kick like a kangaroo with every forward swing. The rusty playground set squeaks, its old metal already hot to the touch and acting cranky. When I get to the highest point that feels possible, it still takes me 3 more swings to let go of the metal chain handles. I shriek. Blue walks over as I roll around in the soft wood chips. She licks my face and plops down next to me, tongue out, just looking at me. The sun feels so bright, even though it's just mid-morning. There's only one big white oak tree at the corner of the playground. My dad used to press dried leaves with me in his old books when he was in a good mood. The big leaves with rounded edges, like they don't want to hurt anyone. He taught me that they were native to the Gulf Coast. Blue and I lay on a patch of dry dirt, and I close my eyes. I can hear kids screaming and crying in the distance, but my mind drifts into a nap, dream hoping that they don't come any closer. My dreams have jet skis and chocolate pudding and ducks. They all make sense, but I still feel worried, even asleep. I see people I know, my parents, Blue, the family, but also Marissa, my best friend from the 4th grade, and strangers that don't feel like strangers anymore. Hi, can I pet your dog? I hear a high-pitched voice from a small body yelling at me from just a few feet away. Before I can shoo her away, a little girl sticks her hand in Blue's half-asleep face, and Blue flashes her fangs with a low growl. The little girl screams out before I can even realize her hands must have been briefly caught in Blue's jaw. She runs away before I can even process or react. I pull Blue's leash tighter to me. My entire body is shaking. I pet her with a trembling hand. She's already back to normal breathing, closes her eyes as my hand caresses her head. I don't know where the little girl went, so I quickly throw our water bottle in my backpack and toss it on my back. I click my tongue at Blue to get up and follow me quickly, but a woman walks over with the crying child in her arms. Excuse me, she yells frantically at us. I stop. I can count my heartbeats and feel the sweat pooling under my arms. Did your dog just bite my daughter? I look at her. The little girl is wailing, but I don't see any marks, any blood. I edge away. Excuse me, can you talk to me, please? Your dog just bit my daughter. Her eyes burn in the sun. I sort of half shrug and look at Blue, who's calm still. Did my daughter ask to pet her? I taught her to always ask. I quickly shake my head no. Is that true? She coos at the little blonde thing. The girl shakes her head. I asked, she wails. She says that she asked. I keep shaking my head. Blue sits down. Your dog just bit my daughter, unprovoked. Do you have anything to say? I look at the ground and will the earth to stop moving. Do you believe me? Look. She pulls the crying daughter's arm out. I peer in. The mother coos at her more. Just let mommy show her. No. You have to. Her hand has a small streak of bright blood, but it looks like a scrape, like something you would get from falling on the wood chips wrong. The indifference must be in my eyes because the mother seems even more full of rage now. Do you not have anything to say for yourself? Your dog just attacked an innocent little girl. My eyes go to Blue. She licks her paws. The woman gets in my face, but up close, I can see she's slightly afraid of me too. Stay here. I need to talk to my husband. We need to make sure she doesn't need rabies shots. Is your dog vaccinated? I nod slowly. Can you prove it? I don't move my head. Wait here. Just wait a minute. She adjusts the crying thing on her other hip and awkwardly jogs back to another part of the playground. I click at Blue and she hops back up. My eyes dart in every direction. It's all open field, flatlands, but may as well try. When I was little, before my parents died, my favorite part of the day was letting baby Blue out of her crate. She would run like a gazelle on one of those nature shows, and I tried to chase after her. Our big backyard with wide open space was one of our few blessings, and I miss it sometimes. Blue knows to run when I run, even if she doesn't know where we're going or why. She trusts me, so I tighten the straps on my backpack and take a deep breath, loosen my hold on her leash, and take off running in the opposite direction from the crying thing and its mother, Blue galloping at full speed beside me. I can run fast, but not very far usually. We keep running, past the Episcopalian church, past the Catholic church, past the Baptist church the family drags me to, past the drugstore and the grocery store in the main street. My chest feels tight as we duck around the bayou path and take a shortcut through some wheat fields. On the other end, I stop to breathe deep heaving breaths, and Blue stops too, her momentum almost pulling us both forward like a roadrunner. As I retighten my backpack straps, she starts to sit back like she's going to poop. Without realizing it, I hiss at her, and a gargle of syllables almost escapes my mouth. No, comes out in a throaty, hoarse whisper. Even though it's quiet, it startles her, and she stops for a moment. I tug at her leash, but she keeps pooping. I feel bad for leaving it, but also I don't. Wild animals poop out here all the time. We walk on, find a clump of shady trees that seems far enough off anyone's property, and stop to rest. We're still maybe a half hour's walk from the barn, but something tells me to wait it out here for a while. Blue finds a soft blanket of dirt and fresh leaves to curl up on. I never really trained her. By the time I was old enough to even think about that kind of stuff, she was already full grown. But she's always followed my cues. She listened to whatever I said the best she could, and now it's like she can hear me even better. But I am still shaking. The sun is overhead, but I can't stop my body from trembling like it's a winter night without enough blankets. Though Blue seems comfortable, her big eyes watch me, track my limbs and movements. Only when I lay down beside her, with my palm resting on her belly, does she finally close her eyes with just a flicker of hesitation. Thank you.
So I'm here to introduce Zane Tanis. Yeah. Unlike Matt, I did remember my glasses today. But also unlike Matt, I realized about 15 minutes ago that the carefully crafted introduction I'd written is at home on my desk in my study. So I did experience a bit of panic. And then I realized all I have to do is tell the truth. So here's the truth about Zane. He's written this remarkable narrative that is the result of visiting every single county in the UP over the last 8 or so months. Now, when he came to my office to tell me that this was his plan, I said, okay, sounds good. And I recalled some of my own plans that have not always come to fruition, especially the most ambitious ones. And so I tried to be encouraging, but I thought, well, what's the minimum that we're going to be able to accept, because 15 or so counties is a lot. But he drove to every single county looking for ghost towns throughout the UP. All this is to say that he is among the most disciplined writers I have ever met. And if you've ever tried to direct a thesis for a graduate student, or you've written one, you know that self-discipline is perhaps the most crucial factor in success as a writer. So that was so relieving to me. Every week there'd be an email with another chapter. And the chapters were interesting, as you'll hear. I learned all kinds of things about the history of the UP based on this periodical that used to be published to persuade people to move here and spend their money here called Cloverland. Some of the material in Cloverland appears to have been a little hyperbolic. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the history of the UP. I learned a lot about music in the UP. I learned what is the absolutely worst hotel you could possibly stay in Escanaba. I learned where you want to order a drink. I learned which towns have way too many pot shops and which towns have way too few. And I learned that when a student comes into your office with this plan that he's excited about, often all you have to do is say, okay, go for it. Send me your work. And that's what happened throughout this year. Give it up for Zane.
Gosh, there's people here. All right, I call this Ghost Peninsula, and this is a few pages from the Baraga chapter. Well, it is dark up here. There we go. Through my scrawls and notes hastily taken in the empty rooms of archives tucked away from pedestrian passing, I parsed, not all too quickly, mind you. The places I did my research were very particular about what was and was not allowed in the archives. Food and drink were not allowed near the venerated documents and books for obvious reasons. This was only a problem in that I do my best work with and research with a cup of coffee near my left hand. It is worth the displacement, though, to find phrases like Ghost Peninsula scrawled between the lines of paper yellowed by age. I make mention of all this because grammatically it may be worth analyzing ghost in Ghost Town, specifically as a prefix rather than a blend or conjunction in word formation. This can be done by looking at other haunted words. If Ghost Peninsula is not enough, then certainly the term ghost industry may be worth a mention, because it was in those notes that I took regarding Baraga County that ghost industry was scrawled, first and foremost. The ghost industry, of course, is not to be confused with ghost commerce, though. Ghost commerce is the simple sale or transaction of goods online in which there is no physical store location. An example of this would be the commission of art between individuals online. There is no physical storefront, only the presence of a digital business transaction. It is invisible to everyone but the parties involved. Conversely, ghost industry is an industry or business that exists on paper but does not exist in reality. There is perhaps no better example of ghost industries in the scale at which they could occur than the tale of Milo Davis and his Ordoc scheme. Ghost industries. Smiling entrepreneurs would pitch the ideas to folk of wealth down in one big city or another. It usually happened in Chicago. Those charlatans would spin some story about dominating the Upper Peninsula's industry, be it the lumber or the ore one. Once the entrepreneur had the money in hand, they simply walked away with the bundle, never intending to finish whatever was actually promised. Milo Davis was one of such individuals, as reported by D.M. Frimadig in Ghost Towns, both of whom have some of the most fantastic names I've ever heard. Mr. Milo Davis, in addition to having one of my favorite names to read out loud, began his scheme by gathering shareholders in Chicago. He pitched his grand idea to them: construct an ore dock in the Huron Bay of Baraga County. The idea was to cut ahead of ore docks further east along the Superior Coast, and effectively making the competing companies and rail lines that owned them redundant. It would have been a great cutthroat scheme. It could have perhaps changed the population demographics of the modern UP by a significant margin. It all depended on Milo Davis actually delivering. And unlike many ghost entrepreneurs, however, Milo Davis actually was able to get the proposed ore dock constructed. There it sat, a masterpiece of human engineering and ingenuity. The ore theoretically processed through that dock would have spread throughout the entire United States. The ore dock's location in Baraga might have changed the course of Upper Peninsula history, if only it had worked. And I mean that literally. The ore dock simply did not work. Someone, somewhere along the lines of constructing the thing had screwed the pooch when doing the math. The railway leading up the ore dock ramp was far too steep for any rail-bound locomotive. An engine car would have been needed for each and every single cart of ore, ensuring it would never turn a profit. This, of course, meant the ore dock was a waste of time, money, and effort. Those Chicago shareholders, no doubt furious about the waste of time and money, tracked down Milo Davis in a fervor. This all happened during the height of Pinkerton-style business negotiation. They must have been ready to get their money back by whatever means available and necessary. Unfortunately, tragically perhaps, Milo Davis was already in Mexico by the time the ore dock had been finished, far from the hands of the wealthy Chicago men and the law of the 19th century United States. Whether Milo Davis had intended to scam these men from Chicago, we simply don't know for sure. Maybe he just saw the writing on the wall and knew there was no stopping the fallout when it came and made the practical choice to bug out. Studying Milo prompted me to consider my own role in the Upper Peninsula. I served 2 positions in the UP professionally, one out of ambition, the other out of necessity. The former was my enrollment as a student in Northern Michigan University. Taught a class twice a year, once a semester, in return for a tidy of tiny pay stipend and tuition waiver. As fulfilling and frankly daunting as the task was, it was that one that was and will easily be replaced with the passing of the years. The hole I will leave behind at MU has already been filled before I even leave. As per the second job, it was taken out of necessity. I do enjoy keeping a roof over my head. Many times when regaling stories of my second job to friends and relatives, I heard, I didn't even know hotels still had bellmen. That should say enough about the position I posit. The previous bellman I had replaced left a mighty low bar, fortunately enough. Were I playing limbo, though, I would have been in trouble. The first got caught smoking weed on the job in the pool room, right outside where the managerial staff have their weekly meetings, during one of those meetings. The second was caught sneaking rollaway beds into vacant rooms during the graveyard shift and sleeping the whole while. Evidently, I was the model employee by virtue of just doing my job. I'm not certain how I should feel about this, though. The hole I leave in that position, delivering towels and unclogging toilets, will be harder to fill than that of actual college instruction. Fair enough, I suppose.
Oh, Zane, you are a delight. Louisa, that was amazing. Sophie, I love that section. Haemaphysalis longicornis, or the so-called exotic tick, is a particularly zaftig species of the parasitic arachnid native to East Asia, New Zealand, and Australia that made its first known appearance in the US in 2017 in Hunterdon County, New Jersey, when a sheep farmer and president of the local chapter of the AC/DC fan club named Bobby Vector, found one, making a figure eight on the newly shorn belly of his prized merino ewe, who was born without vocal cords and so named after the silent film star Lillian Gish. Bobby Vector, serendipitously, a cassette tape enthusiast, had been listening to his favorite band's 1975 TNT album on his Walkman, and when squatting to extract the tick from Lillian Gish's hide, he set the headphones down in a dandelion patch. The tick, upon hearing the bagpipe drone in "It's a Long Way to the Top If You Want to Rock and Roll," lifted its mouth parts from Lillian's sheep belly and turned its festoons, or the grooves, which some feel are responsible for a tick's ability to hear, to the music, and started, at least as it appeared to Bobby Vector, nodding along. Soon the tick became so entranced with the music that the nodding became headbanging, and Bobby used the movement, compelled by AC/DC's siren song, to eviscerate the little bloodsucker with his boot spur. 2 days later, Daisha, at the Hunterdon County, New Jersey Festival of Ballooning, Bobby Vector, with his fourth Bloody Mary in hand, boarded the basket of a hot air balloon sponsored by the state lottery and took to the sky, and, unable to stop rising, never returned. It's a long way to the top, says his headstone, in the county's Fountain Grove Cemetery. This story makes me think, of course, of the influence of ticks and how we might become them, and how no one writes of the influence of ticks quite like Daisha Price. In fact, her brilliant book, Throwing the Bones, proves no one writes like Daisha Price, embedding the facts of our world, culled from nature, anatomy, doctrine, and medical ephemera, into profound and brilliant meditations on the body and its relationship to other bodies, itself, and the confounding and beautiful contextualizing spaces through which this life compels us to meander. Daisha's work sets its subjects, whether a tick or a mother or a sun or a molecule or a thunderstorm over the Great Plains into the air, where they, like Bobby Vector in that fateful hot air balloon, can finally never stop flying. Daisha Price.
It's dark up here. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, Volume 5, has this to say about their new position on grief. An expectable or culturally approved response to a common stressor or loss, such as the death of a loved one, is not a mental disorder. I learn of my mother's cancer over the phone, 1,000 miles and 9 time zones between us. The tumor has already spread. The cancer cells are adrift in her veins. There's nothing anyone can do, but she says none of this. This phone call is for the naming. She speaks her diagnosis through a line that is so clear, I imagine I can smell her perfume. There is no hesitation in her voice, no emotion. She calls because she believes I need to know. End of discussion. She could be telling me about the tomato harvest from her garden, but she isn't. She could be letting me know they're expecting frost overnight, but this isn't it either. There is an artificiality to her voice that suggests this is just a lie she needs to speak in order to reject it, and I reject all of it. The doctors, the diagnosis, this absurd naming ritual. Cancer does not belong to us, I want to tell her, but instead I say, I have to go, and then I'll call you later. I don't have to go. I won't call her later. My mother is 51 years and 7 months old. I do not remember if we said goodbye. This declaration about grief came in response to the removal of bereavement as a diagnosable condition in this most recent iteration of the DSM. In the 4th iteration, grief can be found under its parent category, major depressive disorder. In the 5th, it's a footnote. My mother loves baking and music and romantic comedies and sincerity and manners and dark humor delivered at the most inappropriate times. When I call her at work to tell her how my friends and I have just at that very moment uncovered the answers to all the questions humanity has ever asked, then spend an hour explaining each in turn, she doesn't tell me she has to go or hurry me along. She sings Rick Astley at top volume. She sits on the floor because that's where the children and animals are. She gets out of the car when she picks me up from the airport and stays up with me until 3 a.m. when I'm jet lagged and think it's noon. When my mother dies of cancer, I do not know the precise time because I am not there. I learn of her death only after, in the same way I learn about her diagnosis, over the phone. My mother is 52 years and 4 months old. When I hang up, I feel relief. Grief, psychologists have decided during the intervening years between DSM-4 and DSM-5 is not a condition that requires diagnosis. There is no scientific basis for excluding patients from a diagnosis of major depression simply because the condition occurs shortly after the death of a loved one, they argue. Major depressive disorder is the condition. Grief is simply its catalyst. I would like to remind myself that none of this matters, that mothers die, that I am not a child, that there exist tragedies bigger than this one. In distinguishing grief from major depressive disorder, it is useful to consider that in grief, the predominant affect is feelings of emptiness and loss, while in major depressive disorder, it is persistent depressed mood and the inability to anticipate happiness or pleasure. I am bored with minds that work, that haven't known loss, haven't cultivated grief as if it were a precious resource. I am afraid I am losing the before of her, afraid I am fixated only on her after. A mother tethered by tubes to machines, her slurred speech and forgetful brain. Our final conversation plays on repeat, How are you? She asks over and over. And each time I answer, I'm fine. I'm good. Things are okay. But I am not fine or good or okay. We are trapped, she and I, in this repetitive loop, and I am desperate for a new narrative. What might she say if or when? What did she do after, before, in between? But the answers are impossible. The memories irretrievable. I'm afraid they've been recorded over by her persistent broken whisper and a voice that does not belong to her. How are you? She asks. How are you? How are you? I'm fine, Mom. I'm good. Things are okay. When the DSM-5 does address grief, it provides a timeline for its duration. 6 months to 4 years, the peak of which takes place around month 7. The manual does not elaborate for those who feel grief's pangs beyond this timeline. It places bereavement's new clinical name, persistent complex bereavement disorder, beneath the heading, Conditions for Further Study. I cannot get out of bed, and I am trying to decide if this is because I can no longer remember the year my mother died, or if it's just the cold of winter seeping into my body. Maybe it's the photograph I searched for but can't find, the one of my mother in a canoe with her long brown hair loose down her back, her arms pushing a paddle through the water, framed by a shoreline of trees. I never knew this version of her, and I want to examine the photo for clues as to who this woman might have been. I've looked at this image 1,000 times, 1,000,000. But today, in this bed, after a fruitless search, I think that maybe I've made it all up. The image, the memories, the shape of her body against the water. Her shirt was blue, I think, though it could have been green. Maybe this lethargy has its roots in something else, a chemical imbalance, a hormonal shift, cells turned cancerous, an as yet unknown internal anything because it cannot be grief. It's been too long for grief. A daughter who has forgotten how many years have passed since her mother's death cannot be grieving, cannot still be entangled in the act of missing. When differentiating between grief and depression, the DSM-5 wants clinicians to carefully consider the delineation of normal sadness and grief from a major depressive episode. Bereavement may induce great suffering, it states, but it does not typically induce an episode of major depressive disorder. In her final month, my mother recorded herself reading a children's book for her future grandchildren so they might know her voice, if not her body. She bought a set of storybooks with built-in audio recorders, but by then her voice was ragged, her whole body swollen with fluid which pressed against her lungs and collected in her throat. Her voice a rattling of mucus through her larynx. Still, she read as long as she could, stopping and restarting the recording after each exhale, a final project she was determined to complete. The voice on these recordings is not hers. They sit unopened on my shelf. I am angry that she chose this version of herself to preserve. I am angry that she waited too long. Recordings deteriorate over time, I remind myself, and worry that the batteries in these books need replacing, but fear that the act of replacing will also become an act of erasure. Inside these books, my mother is both alive and dead, herself and not. If I never listen, my memory of her voice is simultaneously preserved and infiltrated by disease. I cannot decide which version I prefer, and so in an act of defiance, I choose neither.
I am bored with minds that work. Goodness gracious, Stacia, that was beautiful. Let's take a 10-minute intermission. One more round of applause for our first 4 readers. Yeah. See you in 10. All right, you all, let's bring it back. Where's Ben? Oh, there. Oh, okay. Okay. There. Yeah. All right. Behind that beam. All right. I like what Lynn said earlier about working with Zane, that sometimes you just have to say, yeah, make this thing and all of that. Working with Ben Fidler was kind of like that. I mean, part of the job is just kind of realizing just when to stay out of somebody's way. And staying out of Ben's way was a joy. If you, like me, are in the market for frozen bird mummies heaved from the fetid mud by chain-smoking archaeologists, then I have the Ben Fidler essay for you. If you, like me, want to learn about bygone Laguel knife-wielding outlaw gangs called the Owls, who once robbed Gold Rush-era French prospectors on the site where a dental ceramics emporium now stands, then Ben Fidler has your number. If you, like me, want to witness the essayistic conflagration resulting from a mapping of the influence of Linnaeus's binomial nomenclature over and onto the human dream state and the machinations of cardiomyopathy or broken heart syndrome, then oh, do I have a book to recommend. Ben Fidler's book, The Endings, in its compulsive drive to uncover confluence among the secret but all too human oddities of our world, feels as if it's existed for a long time. It feels unstuck from time, or defiant of time's parameters, and our own desperate drive to corral our world and its best stories into its formally rigid strictures. In beautifully constructed prose, sparse but rich and oddly atmospheric, Ben's essays prove to us that the eccentricities of our world are not the exceptions to the rule, but are the norm. And the ways in which Ben interacts with the implications lurking in his research are ever surprising. In his essay, Allende One, for instance, Ben, working from a police transcript in translation, writes of a man who gets into the back of a pickup truck, knowing that those inside would be driving him to his execution. And Ben focuses on this man's hands, his wave goodbye, finding, as ever, the small, surprising things embedded within a larger story that, if telescoped in on, can also have a ripple effect, changing the ways in which we see the seemingly major strokes of the story, humanizing it. Ben's work is full of these brilliant essayistic moves, exhuming the furtive details from his research that no one else would likely latch onto and burrowing in. Ben's work is lyrical and cinematic, self-effacing and self-celebrating, humane, weird, daredevil, beatific, and entertaining as hell. I have trouble detaching from his work. It works on us, resonating almost insidiously. I never want Ben's essays to stop reinventing the world for us. Ben Fidler.
All of that from my essays. That's amazing. I got none of it when I wrote it, but thank you. That was very generous. So I'm actually not going to read anything from my essays. We've spent like 3 years crafting, us who are graduating, crafting these theses, poring over them. So I'm going to read something that was written in 3 days. This is the first thing I wrote when I was up here. It's my 3-day novel. Eli turned me onto it. So you sit down, you write a novel in 3 days, and then you cry about it for the rest of the year. So I'm going to read an excerpt from that, just a short little bit. It's called Gone to Pieces.
And it's about the ice horses of Lake Ladaga. And so there's a story by Curzio Malaparte, who is a World War II Italian correspondent. And there was a big battle between Russia and Finland, in which a bunch of horses got spooked and they fled into Lake Ladaga. And it was so cold outside that the lake instantly froze as soon as they got into it. And so the horses, screaming as maybe horses do, were frozen in the lake. And he reports this. This is supposed to be reportage, but it's pretty unbelievable, right? So anyway, I took that idea and I turned it into a novel. And so this, I'm going to read an excerpt about this woman named Curtsy. Her father is obsessed with this story of the ice horses, and it's become his identity. And she's kind of become estranged from her father, and she moves away, and then she gets a phone call that he's dying. And so she kind of makes it her mission to figure out if this is real or not, right? Is this a real story? Is this not a real story? How do I reckon my relationship with my father? So that's kind of where we're going to find ourselves. So at this point, she's managed to get to Russia. She's at the lake, but she doesn't really know what she's doing. So she's found a hermit living in the woods. You have to just create so many characters in 3-day novels. Like, what is going to happen next? I know a hermit. So she's found this hermit in the woods. Just another character. And the hermit only speaks in parables, really, because it's super easy and fast to write, right? Like you can just write parables. So they're walking through the woods, and she's telling this parable about the salt mines of Walajic. Did I say it right? Walajic. Okay, great. Thank you. The salt mines of Walajic in Poland. And so in Poland, there's this famous salt mine, and miners go down there, pull out salt. They've been doing it for thousands of years now. And so one day they build a statue of Madonna out of salt. And then the Madonna starts crying, and the miners freak out. And so they start to worry. So I'm going to pick it up there and just read a couple pages. Yeah, the light. Matt, you're right. Yeah. No, that's okay. It'll make it worse, probably. Okay. So she's just told this story about Madonna crying. And the old lady, the hermit, is called Ellie. Do you believe such a story? Ellie asked. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's possible, I said. Ellie nodded. But you do believe such stories as this, the impossible made possible. I had no intention of clarifying my point. It was true. I did not understand the story, nor did I think I needed to. It was true, I believe, stories as wild as that of the salt mine. Ellie continued. A group was ordered to study the miracle. Priests and cardinals, mine officials, scientists, best of their field, soon flooded into the mine. And do you know what they found? That spring had been rainy. It had rained for weeks. Rivers had swollen. Fields were soggy. In all of that rain, all of that water had moved towards the center of the earth. And one small path had led to an opening right above the Madonna's head. For above the Madonna, water dripped in small, clear drops, tears not of Madonna, but of the earth itself, and they fell perfectly onto her face and rolled down her cheeks and began to dissolve the miner's faith. Now, miners would have to simply look up toward the roof, toward where the Holy and Divine Father lives, to have seen the water dripping. They could have saved the Madonna by diverting the water's flow. But their eyes remained fixed on her form, resigned to God's will. There was nothing, they told themselves, to be done. We stopped and rested on an outcropping of red rocks, speckled granite cleaved and split in tight lines and faults, like an orange slid open by the nature of its slices. We looked over Lake Ladaga, a few boats in the distance through a small white wake. An airplane added a small cloud, high in thin puffs. Ellie pulled some tough dried meat from her satchel and handed a small piece to the dog, who took it gently from her hand and wandered a few feet away and began to chew. Which story to believe? She said. If you are a pious person, the first story. Miracles happen every day, don't they? All around us. Perhaps miracles are so frequent that we count them as we would any other thing, part of the order of the universe. Or, if you are a person of reason, of order, then what we call miracles are simply matters of science, not random tosses of God's dice, but modeled order of the cosmos, bones of the universe that always grow in the same order and work together like a skeleton. But there's a third type of person, a person not concerned with miracles or geology, only the outcome. You see, in the end, Madonna still vanished. In the end, faith and reason aside, it was all kaput. It had all gone to pieces. Ellie said nothing more, but rose a few minutes later after we'd cleared a great silence between us. She leaned against a rock and pushed herself up. Let's move back. It'll rain soon. Ellie spoke with confidence. There was not a cloud in the sky, but I believed her, or at least I believed in the premise. You know, she said, people say that this lake too has performed a miracle. I found Ellie's eyes, and I saw for the first time how deep they were, how endless they moved about in her head, how much they had seen of this world, as if so old they were ageless.
So John's back. And once again, I want to share his regrets about not being able to be here to celebrate Phoebe, and also my great honor in being able to step in to do so in his place. However, his introduction is all in first person. So you really do have to imagine John. If I had a little sign, like a little picture of him, that's what you should imagine. Okay. Phoebe. I recall that sense of wonder when, after buying a remaindered copy of Rick Bass's short story collection, The Watch, at the now shuttered Owl Books in Salt Lake City, Utah, I started reading and had to call in sick to work the next day to finish it. It had the power of a drug on me. Bass's characters get into large trouble by doing dubious things like holding cabin fever inflatable Rocky Bopper boxing matches and raising a world record largemouth bass in a swimming pool for profit. You can do that? Barry Hannah blurbed The Watch, so I read Hannah's short story collection, Airships. Again, I thought, you can do that? You can, for example, have an angry wife drop bowling balls on your narrator from a biplane. Then like I have to go read that. Then in graduate school, I marveled at the assigned stories. Dennis Johnson's untrained and drugged out orderly can save a patient who stumbles into an Iowa emergency room with a hunting knife stuck in his eye. Annie Proulx can invent a malevolent talking tractor and make it function as realism. The curse of studying writing, or any art probably, is that in the before times, you didn't know what you didn't know. When the world of story is new, it's fresh and at its peak. There are rewards to becoming steeped in craft, of course, but some of the youthful magic of discovery becomes harder to conjure. But when I read Phoebe Billups' short stories in her collection, Salt Dreams, I think, you can do that? You can set a story in the Upper Peninsula about a young girl who communicates with an extraterrestrial who crash lands their spacecraft in a snowy Keweenaw Peninsula and now communicates with a young girl narrator over CB radio with trucker lingo. In a suburban basement, a housewife and the reader have drinks served by an AI bartender who is far more unsettling than Lloyd, the ghost barkeep in the Overlook Hotel in The Shining. Or in another story, the reader is dropped into a witch hunt so vivid and disturbing that you forget you've ever heard about witches before. The high of first discovering the magic of short fiction is back. It's not enough to say Phoebe's stories reinforced or fortified my affinity for short fiction. Rather, Phoebe's work has helped restore my love for short fiction. Please welcome Phoebe Billups.
So I'm going to read part of that short story about a girl communicating with an alien via CB radio using trucker lingo. I'm probably the only person with a working radio for 50 miles. The nearest gas station is 40 minutes away and they close in winter when the pumps freeze. It takes an hour to get to school. Luckily, we have plenty of snow days. On those days, Tommy locks himself in his room and I lug my radio and books down to the basement. It's freezing, but I don't have to worry about being overheard. A bare light bulb swings from a wire at the bottom of the stairs. It throws weird shadows on the walls. A buck stares down at me. The light bounces off his yellow glass eyes, and with his soft pink tongue stuck between his teeth, he looks not alive, but something like it. His eyes don't follow me behind the wall of furniture and heirlooms Dad refuses to sell. I lift the cushions off a sagging sofa and lean them against a red and white lawn chair to make a fort. Huddled inside with my hat tugged down around my ears, I feel like a polar explorer. Whatever penguins sound like, that's the sound bouncing around the basement, penguin calls and crackling static. The red needle slides over the dial. I make my voice low and gruff like a trucker's. Hero, red here, what's your 20? I chose red for my CB handle because I thought it made me seem tough. Red sounded like someone who knew how to handle herself. Hero is open to learning about CB culture, asking questions about radios and truckers and the Q&A, but can't seem to grasp the concept of handles. Either her people don't use nicknames or she hates them in a personal way. She hated Hero less than the other nicknames I came up with. The Lone Ranger, Underdog, E.T. It's snowing again, Hero says. This isn't news. Between October and March, snow falls on the Keweenaw pretty much constantly. Sometimes it's hard to tell where the snow stops and the sky starts. Snow sinks telephone lines, it swallows cars and chokes off bridges and highways. I saw a flower poking through the snow today, she says around a mouthful of food. The food on her ship is carefully rationed, sealed in silver tins, and labeled with tongue twister names. She likes to talk about food more than anything else. Describing the best meal she's ever had is the only thing that brightens her mood. Mollusky polyps sparkling with pink sand, pork tender roots wrapped in savory mist. She tells me about a steamy purple dish her mom made for her when she was sick. That sounds like sweet potato soup, I say. My mom used to make that too. No, she says, it's not soup. It's like a vapor. Hero goes on about this purple thing I'm pretty sure is soup. Violet vapor, like a funnel cloud, eaten cold the curris bits. Why don't I understand? After a while, she gives up and asks me to tell her about bet gris again. Bet gris means gray beast in French because the first settlers in the UP saw this big animal like a werewolf on that beach. But it might have been mist on the lake, she says, or people burning blueberry bogs. I'm surprised how much she remembers, even when it seems like she's half listening. Right, it's a legend. She asks me to talk about the singing sand. Once there was a bride who lost her love in Lake Superior, I say, reciting the story by heart. Lots of people lose people in Lake Superior, but she loved him so much she couldn't leave the last place she saw him. So she opens her mouth and, no, Hero says, I want to hear about the last time you saw the singing sand. Mom brought me and Tommy to Bet Gris when we were so young. It's a flicker flash memory. I see the backs of her knees, sweaty white crescents as she kneels to press her hands into the sand. I swear the sand sings, she says. When she rubs her palms into the sand, this low ringing rises around my ears. The whole beach hums with it. I feel it in the soles of my feet. When it's time to leave, I scoop a handful of sand into a red bucket and sneak it into the back seat. I rub my palms in the sand, but it won't sing for me. I wonder if I can make it to the singing sand, Hero says. I hear a sound like fingernails tapping on glass. My stomach turns over. No, I hear myself say, it's not worth dying over. Hero calls her ship a living collection. It contains a pinky ring with a silver stud worn by King Edward V, 10,806 bird calls dating back to the Jurassic era, the ermine cape Catherine the Great wore to her coronation, a tissue Eleanor Roosevelt used to blow her nose, a stag moose, the last of Michigan's megafauna. I didn't believe her at first, so I asked her to describe the objects in more and more detail. That's how I know that one of the bird calls sounds just like a cricket learning to chirp. King Edward's ring has a speck of blood on the inside. The dream, which was recorded without consent, but also, she insists, without harming the subject. Involves the line where Lake Superior meets the sky melting away and tiny white ships sailing through the treetops. It's 3 hours long. At one point, the subject of the dream, who is and is not the dreamer, marries a mackerel. Hero says if there was more demand for it, she would record human dreams full time. She isn't supposed to touch the objects on board, but snow is piling up around the ship and she's getting cold and desperate. Her body is less breakable than mine, more resistant to cold, but weeks of wind and snow have worn her down and her supplies are running low. Her rations should last 12 more days, 13 if she eats very little. When the temperature drops below freezing, she takes Empress Catherine's cape out of its case and sleeps inside it. She says it smells like pine needles and pink pepper. Can't you go into cryo sleep? Hero laughs. Yeah, I'll just get in there with the stag moose. The stag moose spends most of his time standing inside his case, shaggy and sad-eyed. Sometimes he shuts his eyes like he's really sleeping. When he lifts his giant muzzle and bellows, his breath fogs the glass. Steam spills from his nostrils and rolls through the case like cloud cover. It looks like he's creating his own weather system in there, Hero jokes. She's worried the stag moose is depressed. She says she never worried about things like that before the crash. I don't tell Hero how angry I would be if someone ripped me from the earth and stuck me behind glass in a state of suspended animation. I don't want her to worry about the stag moose. Secretly, though, I hope he is creating his own weather system. I hope one day he wakes up and the fog rolls away and we see a city sparkling sharp and promising like broken glass. I'll be there to see it happen. I've already decided I'm leaving with Hero. You can record my dreams, I tell her. Nobody wants your dreams, she says. Keep them for yourself.
Yeah. Our final reader. I'm feeling this welling of melancholy. So I need to hold on to this little pine cone. And like this pine cone, Lauren, that I found in my backyard this morning, Lauren Sparks' eye-poppingly original and achingly brilliant book, This Now, which is to say you, is trapezoidally stepped and clairvoyant and predictive of wildfires. Pine cones are that, you know. Lauren's work has continually and essentially challenged the ways in which I think about and consider the obligations and parameters of the contemporary essay and poem, as well as the responsibilities that comprise the critical engagement of each. In short, in her time here at NMU, Lauren has done nothing short of inventing her own genre. No one is doing what Lauren Sparks is doing. Lauren's book is an act of entreaty, in turns whimsical and grave, a communication and a resurrection. Yeah, but also an act of revision. Lauren's book carries messages between worlds, the land of the living and the land of the dead. It acts as the tin can telephone of our ancestors and descendants. In a Sparks essay, or poem, or artifact, or whatever inadequate label with which we're compelled to saddle their work, Michelangelo can live again as a puppet in a frozen Midwestern field, irredeemable as he ever was, on a spiral staircase in the Vatican, where the book's speaker and their mother once stood, speaking with their fingers to the ghosts who delude themselves into thinking they're angels. In a Sparks essay, you all, Pascal and Descartes can wade arm in arm through a great swamp, meditating on the infinite before being redacted by the etymology of infinity and Rebecca Solnit's treatise on voluptuous surrender. Better believe it. In a Sparks essay, Missives Between the Speaker and Their Deceased Mentor, the writer Monica Berlin, take on the form of collapsing contrapuntals, and we could hug ourselves at their sheer delicacy and audacity, but we also can't keep from weeping. Why would we? And so it's all we can do to stand back and witness this ingenious twining of the bizarre and the quotidian, the world without with the world within. Lauren's book is a cockeyed and spot-on guided tour through our entire lives flashing before our eyes. As delightful as it is disquieting, as dreamy as it is terrestrial. And in Lauren's universe, these reactions are deliciously indistinguishable from one another. Lauren Sparks.
Can we hear me? Okay. Thank you, Matt, for that introduction. And also, it's been so great hearing all of my cohorts' readings. I just love you all so much, and we're all so unique and so different, and it's so great. As Matt said, I'm going to be reading some sort of semi-disjointed portions from my manuscript, so, hopefully it'll make some kind of sense. But the entire manuscript is organized in a sort of correspondence between me and my mentor from undergrad who passed away about a year ago, or a little over a year ago now. And she wrote me this really beautiful letter at the end in response to my undergraduate thesis. And so the Dear Lauren portions are pulled directly from her letter to me. Okay, cool. This now, which is to say you. For and with Monica Berlin, 1973 to 2022. For which a good lake will rise, lake, which once meant sacrifice, which once meant I am devoted, Natalie Diaz. Dear Lauren, I can think of nothing more important for you to hear now than your own words, but I can't just call you up and read you your manuscript, however much I'd like to. Instead, I guess, I'll have to put words together on my own, but I'm not going to lie. I'd like to just sit a while across from you, would like to point to something, make a little pencil check, nod, put my hand to my chest as I started noticing I do when there are no words. My hand in that space just below the collarbone, that place where grief is held, contained, but also where I imagine a room that holds the tender pockets around my heart. I would rather that. Dear Monica, I run my fingers over your words, a lapping, enfold or swathe a person or thing, especially a part of the body in something soft, or to drink up a gentle sound of water, ginger and insistent as a mother, collarbone, tender pockets. I would rather that space below, that place where grief is also. So many of the impulses we call surface, level, aesthetic, outer, flat, or contour originate, like you, like me, in the inner folds, those deeper hollows where breath begins. The room that held the tender pockets around your cumulus heart also held your vagus nerve, the main branch or limb or stream of the parasympathetic nervous system, a system that soothes and slows the body, reminds one to eat, sleep, and breathe. Is that how you did it? Built your home on the edge of the coming rain inside the cloud. I think you see your hand, a leaf on the lake of your vagus nerve, see you compressed to a small image, focused, vision, pen tip, fountain, sharp, and dripping in the vertical light of Gothic windows. Your other hand hovers, elegant as a raven feather, over the open page of your desk. You intimidate me with the Paisley logic of your wisdom, the softness of its weight, the way it twirls into itself is made of other things. Your dark eyes and fabulous shoes, hibiscus tea and French roast coffee brewed to warm our throats, the smell unraveling down 3 flights of stairs like a banner embroidered in lavender cursive. Come in, please come in. Before we wade our mouths open from the shock and take the poems in and in, the click of your Oxford heels on the sagging tooth of 42 stone steps, your stacks and stacks and stacks of books, not one of them dusty, your office volcanic, a state of tectonic rift and merge, dig or slip. The land emerges from within, each peak a cradle, says one of the layers, a voice tucked tender in a corner, insists you don't forget. Rain is memory, is a remembering of the body's wet, of the ears fumbling attempts to follow, to exist here. Like rain, you are a subtle happening, a wood duck smooth on the surface, a single stripe of iridescence on each wing. You are the drops that slide the feathered back, the knowing of fingers, the sinking edges of pond or poem, a shape that necessitates the refocusing of limbs upon approach, upon encroachment, a gradual advance beyond usual or acceptable limits. Dear Lauren, oh, sorry. I think it seems too great a labor to be you, seems an impossible labor. Dear Lauren, it feels important for me to say that over and over, I'm reminded how very many lives each of us lives inside of this one, and how little we can ever really know another, and how complicated each of us is arriving anywhere. Even now, I cannot say why I'm so often and so deeply moved to the point of speechlessness by our students. Maybe because I am envious a little of the ways life moves on for all you after you graduate. Or maybe I get weepy because I know how hard each day can be when the very center of your being is that of a writer in the whole world, every day, on every corner. Dear Monica, the most important function of the vagus nerve is afferent, conducting or conducted inward or toward something. For nerves, the central nervous system. For blood vessels, the organ supplied. For humans, the mother. Bringing information of the inner organs such as gut, liver, heart, and lungs to the brain. This suggests that the inner organs are major sources of sensory information to the brain. The gut, as the largest surface toward the outer world, might therefore be a particularly important sensory organ. We call the parts of ourselves responsible for fight or flight and freeze or fawn the sympathetic nervous system, an impulse released like wind through a slot canyon from the constriction of care, of shelter. The lake holds together its surface with tension. We call this serene. The wind sloshes the lake. The sky wants to touch its frantic eyes with rain. We call this storm. Dear Lauren, life raft that language is, buoy that language is, page after page that keeps us afloat in this very world where some days can feel like the end of everything and other days can slip by unnoticed. Language, both a tunnel underground and a wide opened sky. A disarticulated individual, disarticulate, 1808, transitive, undo the articulation of, separate joint from joint, intransitive sense of, become separated, lose articulation, articulate, able to speak, to utter, to put into words, to give definition to, shape, to form or fit into a systematic whole, to unite by means of a joint. Oh, it's really dark up here. Oh, okay. The form didn't ask the heart, mine or yours, glass the light of absence, e.g., the heart missing a beat. Exertion, the now healing scale of circles, intersection that I was, doorknob, a shadow of the action, recovered, splayed or scavenged in the absence of physical face, cover here, too, tucked beneath the skies still, holes, the turning, roadside, hand-like pause, cover my own eyes, that beast form, no space, the peril of every morning, aware of not seeing the action of my heart, helpless by another, despite Magnolia Day, which is to say, I'm always in prayer, always aware I once saw someone, an image, moving, going. I do not write, I compose. Free from agitation, calm, settle into place, form the substance of, put together the pieces, fashion, produce, constitute. The piece is already there, inside, already in relation to itself. All words relate, recount, tell, from French relater, refer, report, 14th century, and directly from Latin relatus, past participle of refer, bring back, bear back, and from back again, and lattice, born, carried. Dear Lauren, resolution is not what we go to poems hoping to find. You know, of course you do. Okay, the last thing I'm going to read is, as Matt brought up in my intro, a contrapuntal. And I was reading Olio, which is this book by Tahim Bajess, and there are lots of contrapuntal poems in it, and I was very inspired. And so the left side of this entire poem is a poem that Monica Berlin published online in Americana Review, and then the right side was added by me. So I'm going to read across. It's a little bit weird on the slideshow. It was hard to make it work on a PowerPoint, but okay. Contrapuntal winter. It's true. There are places we'd rather be. Although anywhere but here is tricky to pin, down the river or up the slope. Either way we go, on the wall map my child and I hung. The goal is to the blue. I've never understood or pushed thumbtacks into color coding what people mean to say when they say it reminds you where we've been and soon going, and want just how small we want, no, have wanted very much to someday. Last night, here and always, to be unlike bigness, but our again washes the river from my clothes. No, but we are contained sometimes. It's worth trying to figure out infinity, so much nothing alive inside we, like how to say this, how to say here, how a drop of sea is as big as its sea. Remember, we are not to do more than point, how to recognize just how small in comparison the sublime is, in what is indisputably true. Other times, a recognition of self, not other, no other, no other. Impossibility of scale makes all sense. Then love and what love sees, vastness as ridiculous. Maybe it all comes down itself as itself indisputable, life called to perspective. Maybe anywhere but here isn't toward somewheres we find worth trying to figure to be quite accurate. There is sky and water and us, all of us wanting to be somewhere. There is this place of movement that is the wanting itself, and there is where we are not. There is and is and is and is and is and is and is sky and water and us moving toward a future blue we've already pushed into hard. Dear Lauren, this is something, and that something matters to you, yes, and to me. Evidence of time spent, of conversations heard and still going on, with love and on, Monica. Dear Monica, dear Lauren, dear Monica, dear Lauren, dear.
You just saw Sophie Riley, Louisa Barron, Zane Tanis, Dacia Price, Ben Fidler, Phoebe Billups, and Lauren Sparks. Together, they are your MFA cohort 2024.